When Shell Point sent out the flyer that there was going to be a tour down to Cuba, 24 residents here immediately signed up to go to Cuba. Very few people have been to Cuba, so this was an opportunity of a lifetime for us. The tour started on January 22nd, and after a bus trip to Miami, we boarded the MS Adonia, which was a ship that was the first one to go into Cuba after the travel ban was lifted. So we felt really privileged to be on that ship and to see a bit of Cuba. We only went to 3 ports, starting off at Santiago de Cuba, and then to Cienfuegos, and then over to Havana. And all we saw were these 3 cities, but it was very, very interesting. It was a great trip. We were well taken care of, and we saw much. Cuba is a lot like the rest of the Caribbean islands. It looks the same, but we are from time to time reminded that we are in a communistic country and things are not quite the same. So this morning we will be looking at Cuba through the eyes of some of the people that have gone on the trip, and they will in turn take a minute or two to tell a little bit of Cuba from their perspective.
So in 1965, it became a communist country. We went to Santiago, where the revolution ended and Fidel Castro made his victory speech. In that city, we saw paintings on the side of buildings of Fidel and other revolutionaries. And then we saw a vendor that was selling big pictures of Fidel and Che Guevara, who was his second in command. And we wondered, well, what else are we going to see or hear? And they have free education, free health care, and the people seem to like it. They don't make much money. By our standard, it's very little, but their things that they buy are not very expensive for them. They're hoping that when we come, when the Americans come, that it's going to improve their economy.
We're going to be talking about these old cars in Cuba. A lot's been said about these cars over the past 50 years or so, because as you know, there's not been a new U.S.-built automobile in Cuba. So we were looking forward to this trip to see what has happened to these cars. Well, I wasn't disappointed. There's plenty of them there, and they fall generally into 2 categories. The first category are the cars that belong to the citizens, and frankly, they're absolute junk. But they know how to keep these old guys running. The other category, though, the one you're more familiar with, they're commercial. We're talking about taxi cabs. We're talking about 1960 convertibles, and all the cabs are convertibles. Everybody wants to ride in one of these vehicles. Most of the old cars, the parts are the wheels that are left, and they're on donkey carts. So if you want to ride in one of these beautiful convertibles, you'll have to go to Havana and pay the price.
On the trip to Cuba, there were a lot of things that were really different from ours. Number one, the biggest one that struck me were the marketplaces. We're used to going to Publix and getting everything we want, and we can go anywhere we want to buy things. There, they're all rationed, and they have to go into these little shops that are probably like a little 10 by 10 room. One in particular, we peeked in the doorway, and there were possibly a few dozen eggs on the counter, and most of the meat hooks were all empty. There was only one that had any meat hanging from it. And this is the way they have to shop. If they want vegetables, they have to go into another section and get their vegetables. Everything is separate and all rationed. And secondly was the transportation. They're riding around in these open jetties that are so packed that it's a wonder they didn't fall out. Workforces are pulled by little horse carts. Transportation for them also can be bicycles pulling 2 people in the back in an open cart, or pedaling their bicycles, pulling a few people in an open cart. So the differences are just unbelievable. So we're very fortunate to be here, and There's a lot on that trip that was just phenomenal.
The Cuban government has really put a lot of emphasis on the economy and tourism since they have changed their relationship with the United States. And hopefully it's going to filter down the income to the common people. Right now there's just few people that are really benefiting from it. We also noticed that a lot of the men were not working, they were just sitting around and so on. You could see how communism just doesn't work. It's all government controlled. The average income in Cuba is about $20 a month. Physicians earn $65 a month, and the government provides almost all of the basic necessities.
I had the very good fortune of having spent 3 years in Cuba 65 years ago. My quick impression is that it's changed very little since then. However, the naval base at Guantanamo was a country club back then, and now it's a prison. I liked it better the way it was. My impressions of our trip were several things, but one of which was the dramatic difference in architecture. You would go from a beautiful opera house in pristine condition and beautifully maintained, and next to it would look like a couple of bombed out London Blitz shells of buildings right next door to one another. Very little maintenance apparently done in the meantime. The other thing that was interesting, we did our tours on Chinese manufactured buses that were absolutely first class in every way and seemed new for all intents and purposes. And then contrast that with a flatbed truck with a little canopy over it that the Cuban natives traveled that way. That was their form of a bus, so they'd be packed in there like sardines. But anyway, it was a delightful trip. I've done it, been there, done that. Probably don't need to go back the next 65 years, but it was a great trip.
One of the things that I found so interesting as we traveled throughout mostly Havana was I saw 6 or 8 people, young people, especially young people, with some form of an American flag shirt on. And I saw these 2 young men sitting in front of a card shop that I suppose they were clerking at the card shop, but sitting in chairs outside, and he had on an American flag shirt as well as American flag pants. And I just thought that was fascinating. I wondered where they got them and why. And they all seemed to like the Americans. They all spoke and smiled very, very big to us. I also was interested in the uniforms that the school children wore. The elementary school children have on one color of uniform, no matter where they're in school throughout Cuba, it's one color. And junior high school is another color, and high school is another color. It's a great way to do it, but because you can identify the school or the children's ages basically that way. The buildings were terribly decayed, terribly decayed. We only saw 1 or 2 places that had been kept up beautifully, and next door to that would be a building with wash hanging all over. Every balcony had wash hanging outside. Very sad. Saw absolutely no new construction whatsoever in any of the cities that we went to.
This was a wonderful trip to see a country that's so close to us, only 90 miles away, and so different. We can't really understand what's been going on down there until you go down and take that at first hand. The changes that have made are profound. The arresting of a culture 60 years ago, time stood still for that period of time. There are many buildings that are beautiful, which were all built in about the early 1900s, and all construction really stopped after the revolution. The trip itself was a people-to-people trip. That was the one reason we were going there, to find out how what Cubans are really like, and we find them to be warm, friendly people. And as we were leaving the harbor at Havana, they were waving goodbye, and we waved goodbye to our good friends.